we're going to be talking about differences and how to handle those, and especially with kids and within families. And we are very pleased tonight to welcome our speaker for tonight is Jocelyn Chavez, and she will be speaking. She'll tell you a little bit more about herself. First of all, I'd like to say that Washington County Kids is a nonprofit that's dedicated to increasing access to out-of-school time programs, which includes early childhood, after school, and summer. And we also provide support to providers and through the use of trainings. And we also provide some support to parents and guardians in this program. And also tomorrow night, we will have a expo where providers will be telling about what they're going to have available for summer. And so if you haven't already signed up for that, you might want to attend that session as well. And now I'd like to turn this over to Jocelyn, who will tell you more about herself and also go into the presentation.
Okay, awesome. I guess I can start sharing the screen now. I'm not sure if we're wanting to wait for more people. Okay,
No, go ahead.
Okay. Let me get this pulled up for us. Alrighty. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone and good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to be going into this presentation with you all tonight. I guess just to, kind of introduce myself personally. My pronouns are female, she, her, hers. Professionally, if you want to know more about that information, I recently obtained my master's degree in applied psychological science from Pacific University. That's, right out here. The graduate campus is in downtown Hillsborough. I got that in the summer of 2020. Since then, I've been working as a clinical care coordinator at Sequoia Mental Health Services. Even, kind of more broader than that, I'm working towards licensure as a psychologist associate. Not quite the same as a psychologist, but pretty similar kind of role there. That's what I'm kind of working towards myself. I specialize in working with trauma, depression, anxiety, those kinds of diagnoses that come into the clinic. I focus a lot on healthy relationships too. Those are just kinds of my areas of passion. But alongside that, I also focus a lot on culturally diverse clients, people who belong to racial or ethnic marginalized groups, and definitely a lot of people with in sexually marginalized communities. For instance, when I was in my graduate program, I was in an emphasis working with the Latinx and Hispanic populations and how we can better be working with mental health with those communities, as well as I've presented in a lot of research conferences about sexuality, whether it's sexual orientation, gender identity, and the intersectionality between that and racial and ethnic minorities, kind of crossing over, and how we can be better providing care for that. And I myself, in my thesis, focused on sex education for adolescents that are in the Latinx and Hispanic communities. So that's just a bit about me professionally, to put that out there. But personally, I come from New Mexico. I lived there all of my life up until I came out here for graduate school about 3 years ago. Definitely experienced a bit of a culture shock coming out here. I mean, I love the Pacific Northwest, but coming from a space like New Mexico, where a lot of the Hispanic and Latinx people they weren't actually considered minority, they were the majority. And then coming out here, I find that community is not as large. But otherwise, just been kind of navigating that, and that's just to let you know a bit about myself and the kind of place that I'm coming from in this presentation. Just to kind of get us started, to go over maybe what we're going to be talking about, things that are going to be presented in this presentation tonight. I want to first say that there will be time at the very end of everything that I present to be going into questions, discussions about things like that. If you have a particularly like really burning question that needs to be addressed in that moment, please put that into the chat box, and Sherry and Katie are going to help me to be kind of aware of that when that's popping up and addressing that. I might maybe like periodically open up the floor to just get y'all's feedback on what you might be thinking about as we're going through all this. But basically the overview here, let me just minimize this for myself. So the goal here is just be kind of exploring the topics of cultural identity, experiences of discrimination, and how this can come into play when we talk about differences between children themselves, as well as differences between children and parents, any kind of challenges that may arise along the way, and how to approach these scenarios in perhaps a healthier, positive way. I want to put it out there that I'm not an expert in this. This is just something that I'm really passionate about, that I try to bring into a lot of my practice as a clinical mental health therapist. So I don't know everything that there is to know, but I do just hope that with this presentation, it can just really start those conversations, get us all thinking, and maybe trying to make any of those kinds of healthy, positive changes that we might be wanting to see. So I'm going to be talking, particularly focusing on the identity factors and the school system, talking about some cultural differences between children, and then also the interfamily differences between children and parents, as it all intertwines with culture and identity. And I just also want to put this out there that due to the nature of what we're going to be talking about as far as culture and experiences of discrimination, these can be really heavy, hard topics to talk about. So please only share at your own comfort level with those experiences. And also please be mindful of your own presence in your words when speaking about experiences. We want this to be a safe space for everyone to share and learn. We don't want to be adding to the harm that has already been inflicted upon some people. Also, I just want to say that curiosity is always welcome. I think to have a healthy curiosity as we go through this is going to be great. Not only is it going to be a safe space, but I want it to be a brave space as well, where you can come and talk about any of these kinds of maybe issues, difficulties, problems that you may be facing, no matter where you come from, and we can all talk about it in a curious and safe way. All right. So I kind of just wanted to take some time to really like briefly get into the basics first of talking about what identity is. I think it's really important to kind of know this information first as we begin to have that kind of understanding, grounding beneath us. And then from there, we can talk about maybe our own identities, because as we explore our own identities, that's going to help us to better understand the identities of others. So just, I guess, kind of coming from the therapist perspective here, when we talk about someone's identity, we're talking about how they choose to present themselves, how they choose to interact with the world around them and the world and within themselves as well. So here I've just listed some of the more kind of basic standard factors of identity that we might already be aware of, that we might already talk about. So things here like age, race and ethnicity, gender, class, socioeconomic status, that's kind of like how much someone makes in an income, class like that, education level, ability or disability, sexuality, religion, nationality, political views, language, and just these things that are listed here are the basics. This is not a finite list like this. There's definitely a lot more that someone can choose to identify with, because identity is who or what a person is. It's the kind of closeness that we create to people, to things around us. It can be based off of memories, experiences, relationships, your own personal core values, and perhaps all of those things intertwined all together. It can be very complex. Just to kind of like throw something out there, there's all these listed here, but I myself, I find that I deeply identify with being vegan, which, yeah, I'm gonna out myself and say that I'm vegan, but that is like a lifestyle for me. And I find that a lot of my decisions are kind of based off of that part of my values. in what being vegan is, if that all is kind of making sense, as far as it can go a lot deeper than just what could be outwardly presented about oneself. And I hope that this font isn't too illegible, but I'll get into more information about that. Basically here, I want us to look a bit more about what influences our own identity. Like I said before, we're kind of building the foundation of understanding what identity is as far as those like cultural factors. And then from there, let's talk about our own identity factors, because the more acquainted we can be with that, then the easier it's going to be, or yeah, easier it could be to understand that in others. So looking at this model here, if you're looking at the influence, the very core center, think of that as like yourself at the very center, because you know we are at the center of our own worlds in that kind of respect. As we look at this first circle that is closest to the self, those are going to be, you know, obviously the ones that are closest to us, the things that might have the largest impact on what drives us in our identities. Like we said before, that could be life experiences, it could be morals, some of that could be education, the environment, the direct environment that you live in, that could be your neighborhood, that could be family members. We have religion here, or spirituality, how you choose to practice that, any kind of faith that you have. Then there can be more of the biological components, as far as like physical health can go, going back into like the ability or disability, gender, things like that. The people who are closest to us romantically, interpersonally, with social relationships, talking about professionals here, it's all those people that we can hold really close within that level that might have a more direct influence on our own identities. But then here, when we look at the outer ring, this is stuff that could be a bit more at a higher level, not quite within our grasp. We are still influenced by things at this level, but we might not be personally in contact with them as much. So here we have examples like the government, you know, that can have a big influence on how we can identify with parts of ourselves, or how the government could impact just how our identity is seen by others, seen by ourselves, things of that nature. But it is kind of at that higher level that we can't physically kind of grasp. Hopefully that makes sense. It could also be things such as media, the news that we consume, what we see on the internet, and there could be things on the environment at much like wider kind of community level, thinking about like maybe the city of Portland, or even larger than that, Oregon as a whole, maybe even larger than that, going into the region that we live in, or perhaps even just the United States itself. We might not have direct contact with all of the United States, but we are still heavily impacted often by things ongoing within it. And I also want to say that with that outer ring, I do think that education in school can kind of dip into that outer ring. It can kind of fluctuate between the two there of what is really closest to us and what could also be at kind of that systemic level that is not quite within our reach, you know. So I hope that that is making sense thus far. There we go. Just gonna take 1 minute here real quick. So I want to kind of talk a bit about these 3 different areas. I don't have much more information written on these slides because I am just going to primarily be speaking. But please, again, if you have any really burning questions, if I'm not making sense with something that I'm saying, then please put that into the chat if it can't wait. So kind of talking about how these identity factors might be impacted within the school as a system, you know, kind of talking about that outer ring that's present there. It might not be directly within our grasp, but we're still influenced by it. I think with this, it's important to note the kind of history that comes with the educational system, because there can be a lot of discrimination within the school system. Looking back at all the history of that, of people who have not been allowed to go to certain schools, of people who receive higher levels of prejudice because of their identity factors within the school setting, whether that's by like administration or, you know, kind of talking about more of that childhood relationship level. And I think that when it comes to something like the school system as something that can be part of that outer ring that's a little bit farther out of our grasp, that can kind of play onto the differences between power and authority that might be present. So a school may have that kind of authority and power. They can make a lot of those big decisions for a vast majority of people, but that doesn't always make them right in their decisions. I think we often can see that as we talk about how discrimination may come up. I believe that your voice and your child's voice deserves to still be heard and respected. You know, in general, I focus a lot about relationships. I believe that everyone deserves to be in a relationship where they are heard, respected, and they feel safe. And that can go beyond just like the kind of interpersonal relationships we might have with our family, with our partners, things like that. That can go within to the relationships that we have within our community, with our schools and things like that. And within that, you know, we have the childhood relationships themselves, the kids that are at school when they might be confronted with these kinds of challenges because they are different from one another. And I would say the best thing here is to just be encouraging these kinds of conversations, to be challenging negative views that your child may be exhibiting, or that the views that are coming up that might be portrayed onto them. For instance, with that, I find in the work that I do with a lot of trauma, sometimes people often want to know the why behind what's happening. Why is someone hurting me like this? Why am I being treated like that? And you can kind of go almost a little crazy, kind of circling around, trying to understand why someone else chooses to behave the way that they do. Because you can't control that. But the things that you can control are how you talk with someone about it, how you might react to it. I'll kind of get into this a bit more later, but I guess I could just right now. I think the biggest thing here is communication. Again, going back into those kinds of healthy relationships. I want to kind of take a quick moment here. Does anybody know what the difference is between sympathy and empathy? And I can kind of, if anybody feels like they are comfortable taking themselves off of mute, or perhaps saying something in the chat, does anybody have a sense for the difference between sympathy and empathy? What that is?
Putting yourself in someone else's shoes versus feeling what someone else feels.
Yes, that is exactly it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you chiming in and contributing. Yes, so like William said, so sympathy is when you actually have experienced maybe the same experience as someone else, when you have shared in those exact same kind of feelings that someone else can be in. You can have sympathy because I've been there too. Whereas empathy might take away some of those things. Maybe you don't know what that experience is like. You've never lived through that kind of experience. Maybe you can't understand what that kind of emotion is like because you've never experienced it yourself. So when we're trying to navigate these kinds of difficult conversations, it's really important to focus in on the empathy there. Because we can't always, when we come from such diverse backgrounds and we have so many different parts of our identities, going back to the other slide, there's so many different levels there. It's not always just one or the other. There's gray areas, there's mixing, there's all of this beautiful little factors that come together to comprise just one person. So we're not always going to be able to understand everything about what someone else has experienced, particularly for someone who might experience more discrimination than others. It's really hard to put yourself in that kind of place, really hard to navigate that. But to be able to express some kind of empathy, saying, I might not know exactly what this feels like, but I want to. Having healthy communication, so using statements like I statements. I mean, that's something that I always love to talk about with people that I work with, but talking about your own kind of place that you are coming in from your own perspective, as opposed to trying to just lay blame or trying to assume how someone else feels, trying to assume what someone else may have experienced without actually knowing, that can lead to just a greater divide between that kind of bridging and connection that you're otherwise trying to make. When we talk about within the family, for that little section, I think I'd like to talk about like, for instance, blended families or families with immigrant parents, and perhaps the children were born in the US, and there could be that difference there. Acculturation is the kind of term that we use for that, and what that means, I'll slow it down. So there can be differing levels of how much someone will identify or resonate with the country, with the region that they are in. You know, if you're coming from one region, one country to another, you're bringing in all of those kinds of cultural values, those experiences, and you're in a new place where you're trying to take on a new culture. And so then there's that kind of shift in this weird balance that might be happening within someone individually of how much from my previous space am I going to hold on to, or how much of this new space do I need to be bringing into my life in order to make it through as far as like societal standards of, you know, everybody can have what they deem to be appropriate or inappropriate kinds of behaviors. We see that a lot in different cultures like around the world. And so there's that kind of balance of how much am I holding on to, how much am I taking in, where do I fit with that? And when we have families that come from like immigrant families like that, we tend to see that the parents will hold on to a lot more of those cultural values from the space that they were in, whereas the children, if they are born there, for instance, like in the US like that, they'll probably be taking on more of the cultural characteristics of the place that they were born and raised. But then with that, within the family household like that, parents are often trying to instill those kinds of cultural values within the kids. Kids are kind of in the in-between like that. But I do want to just put out there that there can be those kinds of major differences within the family, but that kind of level of how much someone adopts or holds on to or things like that happens at an individual level. So maybe there could be one child that really resonates with the culture from the original home country, whereas another child might totally reject that and want to adopt more from the new country that they have moved their family into. And that can even happen within the parents as well. So I want to just kind of throw that out there just to provide that kind of general knowledge, I guess, because like we were saying before, I guess this is kind of the theme, but the more that you can know about yourself and where you're coming from, and the more you can understand someone else. And that's also leading into that kind of empathy. It might not always be possible, but if we can get a little bit closer, we can try to bridge some of that understanding. If you can have an understanding of where your family lies, where your children may be at in that kind of situation, then that can help with some of the conversations that you're wanting to have as far as gaining that understanding of why these kinds of differences, these challenges are arising within the family. I feel like this is a lot of information to be putting out there, and I do think that this would be good to go back into at the end of everything that's presented today during our discussion and questions. I imagine there might be a lot coming up with that, or perhaps even like real lived experiences y'all might want to be talking about and processing or questioning. So I'll kind of put that there as a note. And otherwise kind of move on to just, here are some, if I had to put all together into more kind of basic things that might help with navigating these different situations that were presented in the previous slide. Again, going into the kind of healthy curiosity that's there. And, emphasis on the word healthy, because to be really curious is good, but to be overly curious to the point where you might be invading in someone's level of comfort or safety that they could feel within the space that they're in, within the relationship itself. If you're wanting to try so hard to learn so much about something that you don't know to the point where it might be making someone else feel uncomfortable, that's not necessarily a healthy kind of curiosity or a healthy interaction if it's compromising someone else's safety or comfort. But the biggest thing here, have that healthy curiosity, not just about what everyone else around you might be experiencing or trying to learn more about that. Have that healthy curiosity for yourself too, as you're kind of navigating, identifying more about yourself and those kinds of cultural factors. And it's really important to listen in these kinds of instances. And I want to also point out the distinction between listening and hearing, because hearing could just be like, oh, there's just kind of like this noise around me that I'm picking up. But listening is really taking into account the things that someone is saying. You're really listening to the words, to the experiences, maybe to the emotions too that are coming up as you're talking and having these conversations. Secondly, I think honesty is really important to be bringing into these situations. Again, honesty with yourself, honesty about the experiences that you have, because not talking about these kinds of important topics that may be leading to challenges or bigger problems, or even lying about the kind of way that you experience them, in the end, it's not really going to be helping to have productive conversations, to be having that kind of healthy growth. That part may be kind of hard to get into. I think there's a lot that leads into those feelings of vulnerability. You could potentially be feeling like you're opening yourself up to some kind of hurt that could be there. But on the other side of that hurt is the kind of love and growth that we're looking for. The third one here I would say is knowledge. You can't know what you can't know. So for instance, even just being here tonight, I'm assuming, because you're wanting to just learn a bit more about that. It's important to know that in the past, if you didn't know these kinds of things, well, okay, you didn't know that, but now you do. Now you can do something about it. There's no real good sense in kind of beating yourself up about things of the past that you can't change. And again, I'm just kind of going over some more basic things, and this is also just coming from my own kind of perspective and place, but being able to do some of your own research is often really needed and is totally okay. It's okay to say, oh, I didn't know that. I want to go back and learn this for myself so I can be maybe better in my interactions, so that I can understand where other people could be coming from at a different level. And then number 4 here, collaboration, I think is really important, especially when we talk about the dynamics between parent and child, because being able to model these kinds of things, like these other 3 areas that I've talked about, being able to model that for a child, being able to show someone else, even another adult, what that can look like to have these kinds of hard conversations, to talk about how you identify personally and show someone else that they can do that kind of work on themselves as well. It's going to make a huge difference. We can work together on this, and we can learn and change together in that respect. And I also just kind of want to say that, broadly with all of these things, it's important to come at these topics with an unbiased approach. Sometimes we can have our own preconceived beliefs, our notions about what something could or could not look like. And that's often informed by our kinds of experiences, by the memories that we have, things like that, which is not to discredit any of that, but it's important to be aware that that could be influencing how any of these things could go, any of these conversations or these situations. And then I also just want to put this out here that your emotions are valid. Any of your experiences with this, no matter where you are coming from or how you identify, how you have felt about these things, how you might be feeling now, anything that's coming up, that's completely valid. Your experiences with any of this in any regard are real and they matter, even if sometimes they weren't the best of experiences. Again, kind of going back into the honesty piece from before, but trying to avoid any kind of like denial or shame in these situations, it won't lead to any kind of productive discussion or any kind of collaborative solution. If we're just so fixated on what I did wrong, what this other person did wrong, we can't necessarily see the bigger picture of what's at hand. And if we're denying one another's feelings, if we're denying our own feelings and our own lived experiences, how is that helpful for working through this, So I think it's really important to be normalizing the vulnerability that comes from these situations, normalizing the kind of humility that it can take to put yourself out there and have to go through a learning process to have to examine maybe some of the things that have been done in the past that weren't that healthy. I think we all do things like that. It's important to still have that kind of patience with yourself going through these things. These are very difficult topics. These are very difficult experiences. You should still remember to be kind to yourself and your kiddos. You have them. Just with all of that being said, we may have to stray away from our comfort zone in order to do so. And that's often what I work on with people in the clinic, is trying to accept that kind of discomfort that comes from something that's new or different. It's not going to feel great, but it's there for a reason. It could be showing you that you're on the path to something that's much, much greater than that. And just definitely give yourself the grace, as much grace as you can, as you tackle these kinds of challenging and heavy topics. I wanted to, as I'm kind of closing up to the end of the slides here, I thought it would be important and helpful to put just some of these books. There's the link for that down there. I believe you're going to be getting a copy of these slides by the end of this evening. But here are just some really great books to recommend if any of you all do have kiddos from these different age ranges, just to be starting those kinds of conversations about maybe their own experiences, if they've ever dealt with any kind of discrimination in the school, or even understanding what that can look like for others, how to be navigating those emotions, just kind of getting, once again, that conversation started with them about how that would feel, about how that looks, about how to communicate about it in a way that is safe and healthy. And here's just a couple of other little quick resources. These two here are really great for parents, guardians, those of you who may have kids in your life, whether these are your own kids that you have, or if you're in a school setting, a teacher, something like that. And then at this last one here, just wanted to throw that out there. This is something that I really love, and just if any of you all are also kind of research nerds like me, but this is the implicit bias test that Harvard University has online. It's little surveys to take. There may be about 10 to 15 minutes each, give or take, on how well you do tests or take surveys, but it looks at a lot of these different kinds of identity factors that I had talked about before, such as maybe race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, kind of things like that. It asks you questions about your kind of interpretations of situations, and at the end you can get your results that let you know, do you lean more towards maybe this kind of view about these kinds of people. I just think it's really great to kind of be checking yourself sometimes and being aware of where you're at with any of those kinds of biases, prejudices, what you could be leaning into there. I think it's very fun and informational, but that's also kind of from my perspective. And yeah, and so now I'm not quite sure how much we have. I'm surprised I talked for so long, and I know there's a lot of talking at you, a lot of information. So I'd like to just kind of open things up for right now. If any of you have questions, or if you'd like to kind of go back and reflect on any of the slides that were presented, please feel free to do so now.
Jocelyn, I was wondering if you had any advice about parents that might be having trouble with a child who's being bullied by a child of a different culture. Are there tools or suggestions you might have that could help in situations like that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it kind of can depend on which side you're coming from here. If your child is the one that is being bullied, I guess I can kind of go back to what I was kind of saying before about when people can kind of get stuck circling around asking, why is someone behaving this way? Why is someone hurting me in this way? Getting really stuck on the why of this. Why is this happening? When again, we might not be able to say why. There might be situations when someone hurts you and they won't give you the apology that you need. That can happen. But I think what's important to do with your child if they're being bullied is to be processing through the kinds of emotions and experiences that are coming up with that, to kind of give that empathy to your child themselves, or even the sympathy. I think we've all probably had some adverse experiences when we were growing up in school. But helping them to make sense of the emotions that are coming up and being able to talk about that in a safe space with someone that they trust, so that they can feel heard in that kind of way. You know, I mean, imagine being hurt by another person in that respect and being silenced afterwards. That can kind of cause whatever is inside you to just keep festering. It'll stay there, and that can often manifest into a lot worse things, things that I work on with people in our clinic and things like that. But just be able to have that kind of space for them, I think, is really important to first kind of start that off. And then as you might try to navigate that with the other child, perhaps the child's parents, is also kind of bringing in these other perspectives, those 4 different kind of tenets about like the honesty, the collaboration, those pieces as you're coming into it. Because when you're trying to have a difficult conversation like this, addressing someone who could be saying discriminatory, hurtful things like that, if you come at someone saying a lot of blaming and shaming, you did this, you're a bad person, things like that, it's just going to cause the other person to shut down. They're not going to be trying to listen to you or collaborate with you on how to make it better. So also, you know, coming at it from those I statements, from that kind of safe space with the healthy communication, can at least hopefully help to open up some of the bridges with that communication about what's happening. That's kind of what I can kind of throw out there for now. I hope that's answering the question.
That's great. And I think that the listening part is so important. And I think being able to make sure that the child is being heard and the emotional part is being addressed. I think you hit on a lot of really helpful things. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
May I add some comments on that, please?
Mm-hmm.
I do really agree about that, because I was uncomfortable to talk about this, and then I realized that eventually my kids will come back, say about this topic, the difference, and ask me question. And the reason why I was uncomfortable, because I don't know how to explain those things. And I just realized, whoa, I just need to listen. That's really important. And I need to study. Maybe I can talk about it. We can't change another people, that how they talk, how they judge people, but we can help our children just say how to respond to this emotion if they hurt. So I guess we just give them a positive emotion support. Is that what that's what we should do, right? That's what we just help them and be a good listener, right?
I think so, yeah. I think, you know, we often in times like that, there can be this kind of push to want things to just get better, just wanting to have that positivity in there. And I would just want to say, I think that is good, but that it's also okay if it doesn't turn into something that's positive, because the fact of the matter is that that kind of experience was really negative and was really hurtful. And it's okay if your child just needs to kind of be in that and be heard in that kind of experience, and not have it be something that turns out to be positive. If there is the opportunity for it to be turned around in that kind of way, then that's fantastic. But, you know, also validating that that might not always be possible, and helping your child to deal with that kind of ambiguity or uncertainty, or that kind of unfairness. You know.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
No, I think I just learned a lot today, so that'll be good for me.
Have That's awesome. I'm happy to hear that. I'll put this next. Let me see. Will it let me? Okay. Yeah. I also wanted to put this information out here. This is Sequoia Mental Health Services. That's where I currently work, and there is my contact information. Again, I think you'll get a copy of this, but if you have any questions specifically about the things that have come up, like I know that this is, it's an interesting kind of environment that we're in right now in this Zoom chat room. It sometimes might not feel so comfortable wanting to speak up in this platform about this kind of topic. So I do encourage you, if you have any kind of questions about this, please feel free to contact me. I would love the opportunity to continue these kinds of conversations. And I'm just kind of
so here's another question possibly. So what about a situation where a parent might feel a child is being treated unfairly at school? What could be done about that? Any ideas?
Yeah, and I almost kind of want to open this up to everybody else too, just to see if anybody would like to speak about any kind of experience with that, or any ideas that they have about what that would look like before I talk, because I've been doing so much talking.
So, it's Kim. So I have a son who's got ADHD, and my grandson is exhibiting some of those same. And his big thing, is very impulsive, very smart kid, but just reacts. The reaction, physical. You took my toy. This is the grandson. You took my toy. So whack. And even at the age of 4, I'm seeing this repeating pattern that happened with my son, where we expect them to be perfect. Everybody expects the children to be completely perfectly well behaved, instead of having that opportunity to error and, okay, we're going to regroup, we're going to relearn, how do we behave, because they're learning, right? And the same thing is true. And we experienced a lot of that going through public school and then private school. They had no idea what to do with the ADHD. So, and then coming back, and he's now in junior high and has kind of outgrown that particular part of it. But my nightmare is that he'll go to school unmedicated one day, and he'll, just let loose because somebody says something obnoxious. And as a parent, you're always on eggshells. It's like, oh, okay, there's the call. And but I think for the schools to teach the children how to behave better, and then how to find that empathy as a parent whose kid might have dealt with that, because we're talking about the bullying. And a lot of times these kids, some of them are bullying because they're bullies, and some of them are not bullying, they're just reacting, and that control part of it. So that's just my experience, and people misinterpreting or judging and permanently, and then how they react scars the children, and they feel like they're bad people, and like really emphasize, you're not, that was a reaction, and how do we work through that reaction, and how do we avoid that reaction? And my question on that, is there anything within Washington County that helps parents with resources on how to deal with kids with ADHD? I know there's the children's program over in Multnomah Village, which is great, but it's really pricey. And I'm wondering for Washington County, specifically for my grandson, if there's any resources available for people who are, can't really afford the high end children's program kind of thing. So that's my question and my statement.
Kim, thank you so much for sharing your story, your experiences with that. Your question seems like it could be specifically more towards Katie and Sherry. I'm not quite sure with talking specifically about the resources in Washington County. I'm not sure if that's something that you all would like to come up.
So one of the resources people have is, of course, going to the counselor at their school. And they do have access to other resources too. There's also the Northwest Regional Education Service District, where for kids who have really more extreme problems, there are special learning environments that are available. But they would probably need to first be assessed at their own school. And if it's a matter of kind of routine issues with ADHD, then the school counselor should be available to talk with you about that and talk with the parents and also deal with it. And for more specialized care, there are also, in addition to the Northwest Regional ESD, of course, there's Sequoia Mental Health Services, and there are other treatment facilities as well as for possibilities too.
Yeah, and just to put in a little plug about Sequoia, we are a community mental health clinic, so therefore we accept a lot of insurance providers like Care Oregon, OHP, providers like that, to make these kinds of services more accessible to people who might not be able to go out to a specialist who's some kind of psychologist that's trying to charge you hundreds of dollars for a session or assessment and things like that. So places like community mental health clinics can be a bit more accessible. And besides that, I think I wonder too that there could be perhaps some support groups in the areas. There's lots of really great organizations out there that put together, I guess now they're kind of like Zoom meetings, but sometimes you can find some parent support groups. You might have to do a little bit of your own research to maybe find something that fits more specifically for you, but those things sometimes are available. I hope that was...
Yeah, there's NAMI, which is National Alliance of Mental Illness, and but they also deal with, mutual support as well. So that's a nonprofit, and you can find out more about that by looking for NAMI. NAMI.
I think that would be great for my daughter. She's actually studying to be a psychologist. So, and then to have the preschool teacher say, well, I don't know if we're going to have him back next year for course because, and she's just like, well, I'm like, it'll be fine, we'll work it out. But she's also a full-time student, so finances aren't her, not flush. So, but I think she would really benefit from a support group for how to work through it. How do you, parenting ideas and, what worked and what hasn't worked. And, just coming up with ideas and workarounds, because really regroup, reset, start a new day,
There's also parenting classes that are available for free, and they're both in English and Spanish, and I think they may have other languages available too. And those, we do have links to that kind of information on our website, WashingtonCountyKids.org. And those are organized through the Parenting Network, through the Early Learning Hub. And so you might consider that.
Is that part of Head Start?
No, but Head Start is affiliated with the hub. Head Start is run through a community action organization, but like I said, they are a member of the hub as well.
Okay.
I believe it was Kim that was talking earlier. I'm no specialist or anything like that, just another parent. And I myself have ADHD, and my son did too, or does. And I found that the first step that I had to take was getting with the teachers and creating an IEP, Independent Education Plan, which is like the first steps of everything, essentially. Most folks are kind of against it because it automatically puts their kid into a category of, well, this guy's a behavioral problem automatically, and we're identifying that. But the other side of it is it also is a encouragement for the child to have second thoughts about their actions, because when they're in those situations, then they're more likely to remember the last time they were automatically picked. I mean, it's a harsh reality of it, but automatically, if there was something to happen, they're the ones pointed out. And so it was one of the first steps that we had to take on our end of things. And then going forward, is finding not a therapist necessarily, but just someone that he can talk to freely, so that way he can identify where he's struggling and get tips and other ways of handling those kinds of situations, because he does the same thing of the reaction scenarios.
That was
Thank
great,
you for
William. Thank
sharing.
you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point too about when we talk about the kind of systems that we're working within on those like outer level things like school systems or government like that. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in those areas. We're not quite there yet as far as being able to tackle these kinds of things, which is really frustrating that that's the state of where things are, but it just kind of shines a light on how important that kind of advocacy is, not just for your kids, but for yourself too, as a parent, as you're going through that and trying to help yourself find those kinds of resources and things like that as well.
Yeah, also there's IEP class that you can take and teach you how to prepare those plan and for kids in school. I took second one that's in somewhere, I don't remember where exactly it is, but maybe I can email later and send you guys all the information if Kim is interested in it. I can forward to
info@washingtoncountykids.org. I think, did you email me before?
I think I do. I think I can send you an email to you and
Sure.
give you those information. I also can maybe give the transfer the presentation that they have a really good information about those, so I can forward to you and you can give to him.
I would love that.
So I just put that in
Oh,
the
thank you.
address in the chat. And so, you know, take a look in the chat. You can copy that and paste it into your email. So that's a
All right.
possibility too. So I think we're getting now to a point where we get to have a door prize. Shari.
I'm always happy to do the door prize. I get to spin a wheel. Let me get that ready for you guys. Thank you all for joining us today. I want to
Thank you so much.
really share our appreciation. And after this session, you'll be getting a link to an evaluation. So if you don't mind taking a couple of minutes and filling that out, that really helps us out and helps us improve what we do for our community. So thank you for trying to fill that out when you get it. And here is our wheel of prizes. Okay, so we have a $10 gift card to Albertsons or Safeway. And we're going to spin the wheel in 1 second. I forgot one thing. Okay, here we go.
Oh,
Christina.
Christina.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Christina, congratulations. What we'll do is I have your email from the registration, and I will send you an email, and I will CC Katie Riley, and it will allow Katie and you to work out the logistics of getting you your gift card.
Thank you
I
very much.
also want
Yeah,
Muchas
congratulations.
And thanks, Ruth, for your interpretation help. So
Yeah,
glad we
thank
had
you very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
to thank
so
you guys for last door prize as well.
Yeah, you won before. You might win again, William.
yeah, you're never gonna say
I didn't even know you guys were doing that, so I
Why
appreciate it.
not? It's fine.
So
All right.
once again, we want to thank you all. Thanks to Jocelyn for a great session.
Thank you,
And
Jocelyn.
thank you participants for chiming in and participating as well.
Yeah.
And we hope to see you again in the future. And thank you again. And have a great evening.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Just gracias.